Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 News. Oscar Piastri has finally responded to the recent collapse of his World Championship ambitions, tracing back to a few key moments earlier in the season, especially what's happened in Monza. Yes, his most recent podium, but also not the key story of that weekend. The team orders drama with Lando Norris after the pit stop towards the end of the race seems to have been perceived as an injustice from Oscar Piastri's perspective, leading, at least to a certain extent, to this recent dip in form. Is there any chance he can turn it around, especially if his mentality is somewhat compromised as a result of feeling hard done by the team internally? Very much enjoy your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. Plenty to get into today. We're going to start here. The RB22 will be launched, we think, alongside the AlphaTauri, the racing bull, whatever it's called nowadays, in 15th of January 2026 in Detroit, Michigan. So I'm sure that Max is buzzing to get out to Detroit in the middle of January, but that's where they're going to do it. Of course, you've got the Ford partnership. There is probably something to note about this image here. Look, I think we can predict what the Red Bull livery is going to be, but with the Ford partnership, there has been some talk. Could they change the livery? Could they add a little bit of white? You can actually see here there's a little bit of white on the outline of the Red Bull logo, which you don't always get. So I'm not going to talk too much about that, but that's some of the rumours anyway surrounding that launch. You might also note rather earlier than normal, right? We usually get the launches early Feb. This year we're talking middle of Jan. That's because a week or so after this, they're going to be on track in Barcelona for some preseason testing, right? So it's going to be a busy few weeks to come. Speaking of racing bulls, who we think are going to launch at the same time as Red Bull, there was a bit of drama here. So this is the podium, as you can see. Kimi Antonelli, Lando Norris lifting the trophy, Max Verstappen on the podium as well. And, well, there was this image doing the rounds, actually it's a video doing the rounds, of this Red Bull team, or Racing Bulls team member in the foreground here, gesturing to the crowds with, you know, the thumbs down. So now some people said, oh, he's thumbsing down the crowd for booing, but the crowd weren't really booing him, right? So it appears that this team member was trying to like incite the crowd to give Lando some boost. We saw it a lot in Mexico, in Brazil, less so really, but probably still a few anyway. And you had this Racing Bulls team member, seemingly anyway, that was the implication here, kind of gesturing to the fans, and he's got his phone in his other hand or whatever he's doing to record it, kind of saying, oh, you know, give Lando a bit of stick, right? Now, there's been quite a bit of drama about this, you know, like his team member, they grabs his hand and they're laughing about it, and it's like, oh, you should stop doing that or whatever. And then you see the podium and all this. So there was some reaction to this, to such an extent. So a lot of Lando fans weren't very happy having seen this. And I thought it was kind of remarkable today that Racing Bulls themselves actually responded to this. They put out a tweet that said, "We are aware of the video from this weekend's podium. It does not reflect our team's values or the spirit of VCARB. The matter has been handled internally. We believe in celebrating great racing and showing respect to every driver, team and fan of both on and off the track." So then there were tons of replies here. So all sorts of drama. I don't know if you think this has been blown out of proportion to some degree. Like, yeah, okay, should the guy do it? Probably not, right? Like, it's okay that you want your guy to win rather than their guy, fine. I guess if you work for a team, you're up on the podium in the public eye, you probably should. You know, you don't have to clap or to cheer or whatever. Like, you don't have to do that for a rival. But, you know, it would be nice to be respectful to the champion, or you know, at least the winner of the race. We'll see who ends up winning the championship in due course. But probably avoid inciting the crowd to give him a bit of stick. But I don't really think it's a massive deal, right? Like, do you really think this is a major story? I don't know if it necessarily warranted a response from the team. You know, I don't imagine that employee has been, like, fired or anything. You know, maybe they've told him, right, like, best not to do that again, and we'll do a tweet. That's probably what I would do. It's probably fine. We'll see how things go forward. Speaking of drama, Alpine, they're always involved in something. So their headquarters at Viry-Châtillon, that's where they also did the engine stuff. But of course, they're now no longer doing it. Apparently, it got broken into. So we saw the Louvre the other day got broken into, or like something got stolen from it anyway. Now it's the turn of the Alpine headquarters. Apparently, people broke in, went straight to the management offices, forced open a load of doors, but nothing was stolen and nothing happened. So why, right? Some sort of show of force, some sort of frustration against the Alpine management? Who knows? Toto Wolff, he's selling a stake in Mercedes. He's not selling his whole stake, but he is selling a stake. There is, I think it's Ineos own a third, Mercedes themselves own a third, and Toto Wolff owns a third. Remarkably enough, when Toto bought that third of Mercedes, it was worth at the time something like $160 million or something in that kind of ballpark. Today, that stake that used to be worth 160 odd million is apparently worth about $2 billion. So it's like 10, 12, 15x in value, roughly, depending on the valuations you believe. Reports have it that Toto's looking to sell 5% of his stake for, well, what would add up to a $6 billion total valuation. So apparently he's selling that stake for $300 million, and he will still keep 28% of his holdings, but those $300 million will be going to someone else as an owner. So where's it going to go? It's an interesting question. He's not going anywhere as CEO or team principal, but it is kind of interesting. Maybe he is selling some of his stake at what he perceives to be kind of the peak, right? Formula One's been through some boom years. The fact that Mercedes F1 team, like if his 5% stake is getting valued at $300 million, putting the team valuation total at $6 billion is truly remarkable if that indeed is what he is selling. So maybe it's a good time to sell, but equally, if his stake goes below 33%, does he have the same voting power, decision-making power list that he used to at 33% when it was equal between the three different ownership groups? So intrigued to your thoughts on that. I mean, look, he's done pretty well, hasn't he, out of this whole arrangement? That is likely set to continue. Couple of thoughts on Ferrari before we get into the Oscar Piastri stuff. They're now third in the battle for P2 in the championship. Mercedes are up to a pretty comfortable second place. I think Mercedes will feel pretty good about this because they've only got to hold off one man, really, in Max Verstappen from the Red Bull Racing perspective. But Ferrari, they dropped down to P4. We've seen all these comments over the last few days coming out of John Elkann, who basically told the drivers, focus more on Ferrari and do less talking, right? We discussed that in detail over the last couple of days. Jenson Button had a take on it and said, maybe John should lead by example, which I thought was a pretty great comment, really, saying, look, if you're talking about focusing more on Ferrari and talking less, maybe it's about time you did the same, right? How about you let the team have a little bit of unity rather than talking about unity, but then publicly saying the opposite, whatever. It's frustrating me again. I'm not going to get into it in detail. But apparently a Ferrari spokesperson talked to ESPN and said his comments were meant to be constructive and were the chairman's way of spurring everyone on. It's like, yeah, sure, right? Sure. That was what the intention was, and that was definitely what the result has been, given you then get Hamilton and Leclerc doing their own kind of, backhanded remarks to say, look, we're here, we're united, we're going to keep trying the best for the team, even if the car isn't where it should be. So that's a whole other question. There is, as a result of this, understandable further discussion on what Hamilton's contract situation really looks like. As I've said a few times, Hamilton's performance this season, while the point scoring hasn't been great, the actual pace with respect to a prime Leclerc in a team that Hamilton's just joined has been pretty good, certainly as the season's gone on. In over the entire year, his average compared to Leclerc is a 1.3 tenths down, and since the summer break, it's less than a tenth on average to Leclerc in qualifying. So, very competitive, all things considered. At the same time, Hamilton has made no secret of the fact that he does not really get on with the current era of cars. He's hoping 2026 is better. But of course, the talk is about the future, right? What does the contract look like? Because there were some rumours, even before these comments are made by Elkann, that as soon as Ollie Behrman got that P4 in Mexico, all of a sudden Ferrari are thinking, oh well, damn, Ollie Behrman's doing pretty well, he's in our academy, we'd better put him in the main team at some point, kind of like how we did with Charles Leclerc, which it's, look, expected. Yeah, Behrman has a great weekends, but as I said, when he did that, Behrman's been having good weekends for a while. It was kind of only a matter of time until he really put it all together. It feels, I don't know, it felt a bit short-sighted or something from Ferrari, given the rumours in the media, to be like, oh wow, Behrman's nearly had a podium, it's time for him to get in the team. It's like, well, that's one weekend, right? Like, that doesn't reflect the entire performance. If you'd have been watching Behrman's season, you'd have known that he was, making progress, but it was a strange thing for me to see that Behrman gets one big result and all of a sudden it's like, oh, put him in the Ferrari. It's like, well, yeah, probably in a couple of years, right? But I rate Behrman highly, but I just found that whole scenario kind of surprising. It's almost like they don't really know what they're doing, but, I think we've seen that before. So as a result of this, Hamilton was then asked to comment to be like, okay, what's your contract situation? Hamilton said, look, I'm not even anywhere close to talking about renewals because that's simply not going to be necessary. And according to Andrew Benson at the BBC, it's a 3-year deal, a straight up 3-year deal, a firm 3-year deal, not a 1+2 or a 2+1 or whatever. This is a 3-year deal at Ferrari to take him through 2025, 2026 and 2027, which seems to make a fair bit of sense. It also means that if Ferrari did decide, if John Elkann was like, you know what, screw this, I'm going to rip it all out, rip up Hamilton's contract, imagine how much it would cost them to make that happen, right? Given the amount of money they're paying Hamilton. So I don't think that's especially likely. I think we're hoping that the team can find some level of unity, because Formula One is in a better place, I think, when Ferrari are competitive. And this season has not been one of those seasons. Even Juan Pablo Montoya says Hamilton's frustration comes from the fact that he feels he is doing more for Ferrari than they are doing for him. He's committed to trying to make things work, but the team isn't up to par, which is funny, right? Because John Elkann said exactly the opposite, that the team is up to par, but the drivers aren't. So, there you go again, right? That is where we're going to leave the Ferrari drama for today. Let's get into the Oscar Piastri stuff. It's been a very challenging couple of months. It was early September, over 2 months ago, where Piastri had his most recent podium in Monza. As we know, he was third. Lando Norris was second after the big team orders drama at the end of the race. I don't think I shared this the other day, but it was, it's kind of sad, really. He's done this partnership with Grilled, like a burger joint out in Australia, and he's got the Piastri burger. They were giving away a free bonus burger whenever he was on the podium, and now they've had to change that to whenever he races. New offer, they say. And the funny thing is, having noticed this, I feel bad for laughing really, but they had to come up with a statement. Look at this. They did a statement, Justin Bieber, sorry, to everyone who believes in the curse, because since they did that offer with the podium, he hasn't got a podium. So people are like, oh, I can't believe they cursed him. We'd like to apologise. We never meant to create a burger so delicious it could change the course of history. Of course, it's all kind of in jest, right? But they say, we're sorry the burgers had to slap that hard. We can take a joke about a curse, but let's be real, we'd never bet against a guy like Oscar. He's our homegrown hero, always be in his corner. So, I just thought it was actually pretty good marketing, to be fair, here from Grilled. I think it's a pretty good statement in the circumstances. But it is pretty funny that they decided to respond to all this drama. But Oscar Piastri, he sat down before the Sao Paulo Grand Prix with Formula One to talk about a fair few things. And what he discussed here was, I think, very interesting when it comes to his mindset, and also some other theories around what has been going on over the last few weeks. Because Brazil, in some respects, was a continuation of what we had seen. It wasn't... his pace wasn't horrific in the race. It's worth keeping in mind. The first stint, yes, he dropped about 6-7 seconds to Lando. Probably some of that was pure pace, but he also did have a lock-up on his tyre from the incident with Antonelli earlier on, so that will have cost him some performance on the car. And in the second and the third stint, Piastri's pace was pretty similar to Lando, but, Lando was probably doing a lot of management out at the front of the field, knowing that, he had enough. Well, having said that, Lando did say towards the end, actually after the race, that he was pushing pretty hard and he didn't have the pace that he really would have wanted, and Max was closer than he would have liked. So Piastri's pace on the Sunday wasn't bad, really, but it's just another kind of compounding of errors. Yes, the penalty, I think, was harsh. It was fair, in my opinion, based on the rules. There are some debates on whether those rules are reasonable or not, and whatever way you look at it, Piastri, if he was maybe driving better on the weekend, if he was qualifying better, he was nearly 4 tenths down on Lando in the main qualifying session again, which is a lot when the whole grid in Q3 was separated by 6 tenths or whatever it was, closest Q3 ever. Oscar was like 3-4 tenths away from Lando. So that wasn't ideal. If he was qualifying in a better spot, then he wouldn't be in the position to need to go for that move on Antonelli as he did, right? I will say, as we get into Piastri's feelings and kind of why we've seen this performance drop off that he's had, the team, have they supported him as they should have done? I think that's a key conversation, because if I'm Mark Webber, Piastri's manager, I will feel, and of course there's always going to be some level of bias towards your own driver and all this, but I think you can feel that the team haven't backed him maybe as they should have done on occasion. There were certain papaya rules this year that went Oscar's way, others that went Lando's way, so, I'm not going to get into that discussion again, but I do think that Andrea Stella and their response to the Piastri penalty was interesting, because Andrea Stella was asked to comment on it, and he said it was definitely on the harsher side. But actually, this is what he said as soon as it happens. And he says he hasn't talked to Oscar yet. The video, the replays, it's the best thing. So basically what he said is, the best thing to do is to just rely on the stewards applying some consistency, we don't have major reasons to complain, so we've got to stay focused. So Andrea Stella basically said, within reason, he thought it was fair, right? Now, again, there's been lots of debate. It's a very contentious penalty. You guys have talked a lot about it in the comments over the last couple of days. But Andrea Stella was like, well, as long as the stewards are consistent, we're not going to complain about it. Imagine this was Christian Horner, right? Like, Max was pulling off some ungodly stuff in 2021, Jeddah, for example. Many other examples in the last couple of years as well. And Horner, for all of his faults, he would always be there with the printout defending Max to the press, right? That's always how it would be. Horner would defend Max to the hilt, regardless of the circumstances. And I kind of think that's how it should be on some level. Whereas Andrea Stella is like, well, you know, unlucky Oscar, like, you shouldn't have done that. It's kind of the implication, right? So I think that's, I'm not saying he wouldn't have said the same thing about Lando. Maybe Zach Brown would, like, have had a different approach. I think Andrea Stella himself is pretty unbiased between the pair of them. That's just my personal feeling. But I do feel that Piastri can look at that situation, and likely has looked at that situation, and feels like he is being dealt a more difficult hand. And I think this is where it all comes back to Monza. So Piastri gave some comments on why Baku was so bad, especially because Baku was kind of the start of all this. It was a shocking weekend from many angles, but especially because Piastri was kind of considered, you know, very ice cold. The pressure wasn't really getting to him. And yeah, he'd lost a few points here or there since Zandvoort, Monza, of course, being an example. But it didn't feel like it was really going to get to him that much. But he turned up to Baku and it was just an absolute horror show from start to finish. And Piastri says it was a combination of a few things, really. The race before that was Monza, which I didn't feel was particularly great for my own performance. And there was obviously what happened with the pit stop. So this is the critical sentence here. This was the full comment that he made. Because, yeah, he wasn't that quick in Monza. And after the race, he came out and said, well, you know, obviously the pit stop drama wasn't great, but really I'm just focusing on why wasn't I quite quick enough, right? Because at the end of the day, Lando deserved seconds. Whether you, if you were McLaren, would have given it back to him. If you guys aren't familiar with the story, Lando and Oscar were staying out late to try and get a safety car to try and beat Max. That didn't happen in the end. Leclerc was going for, well, he was a little bit faster at that time. He was probably going to undercut Piastri at some point relatively soon. So Lando came on the radio. He was asked, do you want to pit first or let Oscar pit first? He was like, you can pit Oscar first. That's okay. Protect him from Leclerc. The real reason Lando would have asked for Oscar to pit first is because given another lap, then maybe he gets a safety car that helps him beat Max. And he certainly doesn't want to land a situation where he pits first, then there's a safety car, then Piastri pits for free and comes out ahead. So the team promised on the radio, they were like, there's not going to be an undercut here. Piastri is going to come out behind you. Don't worry about it. But of course, Lando has the slow stop. He comes out behind Oscar. Then they tell them to swap position. So very controversial at the time. There was a feeling in the papaya rules or whatever that this was not meant to be accounted for, but the team did it anyway. And yeah, maybe it was fair by what they had decided. But Oscar wasn't happy about it immediately afterwards. I don't think many of the fans were happy about it either. And now Oscar comes out and says that Monza, the pace wasn't great, but also the pit stops definitely affected him, right? Like, he literally says that from a mentality perspective, that was a challenging thing to deal with. Maybe he felt like he was dealing with some level of injustice from within the team himself. Then, of course, Singapore happened shortly afterwards, and then there's the repercussions that then never come to anything because of what happened in Austin that he was deemed at fault for, which I think is probably fair. But, you know, I think McLaren and Oscar painted themselves into this corner to some degree. We saw it in Silverstone, for example, right? When Oscar was on the radio saying, well, if you guys think the penalty was unfair, you should make Lando yield the position. That was never going to happen, but I think that because McLaren showed willingness to interfere in the way that they did, that put Oscar's mentality in a position to be like, okay, if something kind of dodgy happens, I'm going to ask for it, right? I kind of expect that level of treatment. And when he doesn't get it, then he's going to feel a bit hard done by, whether you think that's fair or not. Then, of course, Baku was just tough. He said he tried a bit too hard, unsettled the tyres a little bit, led to the crash in qualifying. Then I started further back. It was all a catalogue of errors. But as he says, this was, the worst weekends of racing in his career, right? He said, perfect storm of things that went badly wrong. That was the worst weekend I've ever had in racing, but it was useful in terms of some of the learnings that they were able to take away. There was also this other report from Motorsport in España saying that Oscar is kind of confused why the driving style he had earlier in the season doesn't quite seem to be working. The McLaren explanation from Stella is about the low grip tracks. They say, well, Mexico and Austin and maybe Brazil, not as much grip, and Piastri struggles a bit more in those conditions just naturally driving style-wise compared to Lando. But, does that really add up? You look at a circuit like Shanghai earlier in the season in China, that's not a high grip circuit, really. Oscar won there pretty convincingly. So it's all rather strange. The conclusion that many are drawing is that either there's something with that car that they've not discovered. But they say they've looked at it. They say that it's the same as it used to be. It's not like they've brought some major updates that have changed the characteristics of the car. So the conclusion can only really be for many that this is mental, right? And from a mentality perspective, he's struggling. The pressure's on. Even Michael Schmidt puts together an article I thought was pretty interesting at AMUS. He said the following: a confidant of Piastri says Oscar is one of those people who doesn't let anything get out. Instead, he bottles everything up. Eventually, the burden becomes too heavy and the cup overflows. Very interesting assessment there about that Oscar, from the public-facing perspective, always looks very cool and calm and collected. But internally, if things are starting to mount up, then at some point that's going to blow over. We saw that in Baku. Obviously, we saw what happened after that. I mean, the comments he made here on Piastri has made more mistakes in the most recent 5 Grand Prix than he did in his first 61 Grand Prix of his career is pretty bad, right? And they talk a little bit about some of the other factors that we have discussed. But he concludes as follows: Oscar Piastri is in a slump. Since he didn't become a different driver overnight, the crisis is mental. If the Australian wants to return to the championship race, he needs to build on small successes and forget what he believes happened unfairly. So an implication there that Oscar has been affected by what he perceives as internal injustices within the team. Otherwise, the McLaren-Piastri partnership will not last long. So that's where I wanted to leave it pretty much for today. Very much intrigued to your thoughts in the comments below, because can Piastri properly recover from this, really? He's now 24 points behind. If Lando outscores Oscar by just 2 points over the next 2 rounds, then he wins the championship before we even go to Abu Dhabi, as long as Max doesn't make an absolutely sensational comeback, which I still wouldn't entirely rule out. It is Max Verstappen after all. But Piastri, of all of the 3, almost now feels like the least likely to lift that championship trophy. So we go to Vegas next. Enjoy your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new. Take care. And I'll see you next time.